In today's episode, I speak to Charles Radclyffe about AI in the hands of a maverick. We discuss the ethics of AI and why AI mistakes are mistakes that we, humanity, cannot accept, unlike the human mistakes that are made today. We talk about how all data is biased and we must ensure that it doesn't cross the creepy line. We need to ensure that the human touch remains, particularly in deciding what things a machine should never do. And we need to decide that now before the technology gets too advanced. Listen up to the rest of the conversation. Before we begin our conversation, here is a quick shout out to the pathologically curious. Check out the Maverick Paradox magazine. It's a digital magazine written by Mavericks for business owners and professionals. You can find the magazine at themaverickparadox.com. The magazine's aim is to provoke maverick leadership everywhere. Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. And today our guest is Charles Radclyffe. Hi Charles.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Steve.
Excellent. Before we kick off, tell us all about you.
So I'm Charles Radclyffe. I've got an unusual background. I've always been fascinated by technology and wanted to spend a career in tech. But my dad told me it wasn't something, it was a bit of a fad and I'd never make any money doing that, so I should do something a bit more respectable. So I followed his advice briefly. I followed his advice and nearly became a lawyer. So I studied law and I very, very nearly went into practice, but decided at the last minute to abandon that, and I spent my career in technology. I've been lucky enough to build and sold 3 tech companies. I failed at one, which is a much more fun story. And in between each of those, I've worked in senior innovation roles for large corporates. And right now, I'm setting up business number 5, 6 months into business number 5. So I'm back in the saddle again.
And what's that business? Tell me about that.
So we're called Ethics Grade. And what we're worried about is how advanced technology like AI and blockchain, quantum computing, virtual reality, all these technologies have amazing potential to transform the world. But what we worry about is that the governance in place in tech companies might actually cause a backlash, and we might not get that benefit. And I think we've seen this year with contact tracing apps. There's been a lot of concern from people, and we've all accepted our civil liberties being eroded and being asked to stay at home, and done so quite willingly, but yet being asked to download some apps on our phone to track our behaviour, track our movements. Many of us have resisted that, and so I think that's the problem. And so what we're doing is we are rating companies based on the quality of governance they have around technology. So we can compare Alibaba against Amazon, we can compare TikTok against Twitter, we can compare Huawei against Hewlett Packard. And what we're hoping to do is to do this in order to give better transparency to people, and hopefully then people can nudge their favourite tech company or their most hated tech company towards better practice. So that's what we do at Ethics Grade.
That's interesting. So have you looked at any governmental ones, anywhere in the world, any government ones?
So in terms of what we look at companies. So we're looking at tech companies and other organisations that are investing in AI technology. So we're not looking at governments as such, but I've certainly been, one of the many people who've written articles and been quite critical of various governments' approaches to this. The challenge is, and I can fully sympathise with this, is that if you're a business leader, or indeed if you're a politician or a senior civil servant, you've got there not because your tech skills are great. You've got there because your ability to manage complexity and handle controversy and manage people and leadership. Those are your skills. And so I do feel somewhat sorry for our politicians, our leaders who are faced sometimes with technology problems and don't understand what's going on. But that's I think you've got to recognize your weaknesses and make sure you're surrounded with good people. And I think unfortunately, particularly in the UK, we've made some big mistakes this year around our use of technology. The A-level results fiasco is one good example, and more recently we've seen the coronavirus testing go wrong, and both of those are down to just poor governance. But that's not something that we're measuring. That's something we're certainly commentating on.
And that's really interesting. I think, especially when you mentioned some of the apps and some of the things that's gone on more recently, I think people are sceptical because they don't trust what's going to happen with the information. So I think people trust the usage of what's presented, but because of the other things that we've seen, like the stuff on Facebook and how AI is used in law enforcement and things like that, there's a lack of trust that once you've taken the data for the one purpose, that it's not going to be used for another. And if these organisations could do things that enabled us to trust them, then the AI spread would happen more rapidly, I think.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what we believe is, if we can shine the spotlight on organisations that are really, they're really getting this right, then hopefully, they will get commercial benefits from that. They'll sell more of their products, and then hopefully other organisations will copy that. So, that's certainly our intention. But the sad thing is, I think in the tech industry, there aren't that many good examples. Certainly within the big companies, I think if you look at, if you look at, all you mentioned Cambridge Analytica and that scandal, that was probably the turning point where people like me were talking about the issues and being seen as a bit of a fringe, activist type thing. And then Cambridge Analytica really brought it home to people that, Facebook, which was, for many years a kind of, darling of the tech companies. Mark Zuckerberg won Time Person of the Year in 2011. So, there's a pretty swift and sudden fall from grace in just a few years. And I think now there's a bit of a contagion. And, certainly this year, Apple, Google, have been two organisations which have obviously put some effort into contact tracing technology, but they've made some errors, I think, in how they approach that, and as a result, we've not seen the uptake that we would need and we would hope for in order to get the benefits. So if we can get that right, I think we've got a rosy future ahead of us. But if we don't, I think we might end up in a place like we've seen, with genetically modified food 20, 30 years ago. I probably want somebody on the side of the fence where I would probably have wanted to see a lot of restrictions around genetically modified food. But I think the approach that was taken in Europe around that meant that there was quite a strong backlash towards this. And now in Europe, I think we see hardly any, if any, genetically modified food, whereas in the States it's quite commonplace. So I think that's the kind of the story. If we don't get this right around trust and technology, trust around AI, we might end up seeing AI adoption just not happen, and that's a very different future to the one that many of us hope for.
So that's true. So in terms of leadership, so how does AI affect leadership in terms of organisations internally and externally?
So there's two things. I think leaders can use. Let's maybe just and first of all say what AI is, because there might be many people who are listening to this who've heard the term being used, but might not have a good understanding of what actually it is we're talking about. So so when I think about AI, I think about three things. Firstly, there's the ability of machines to perform kind of dexterous movements in the physical world, and that's commonly thought of as robotics. But where robotics ends and AI begins is such a blurred area. So I would include that in my definition of AI. But obviously, for many industries like banks and insurance companies, they're not going to see many robots, physical robots, in their offices, apart from maybe robotic vacuum cleaners and robotic vacuum cleaners is probably the only example I can think of top of my head. You've then got automation technology, which is really about taking a task and orchestrating that task and sort of handling the flow of activities. And so the tech industry tends to call this robotic process automation, although there's no physical robots involved. It's all in software. I prefer to call it digital process automation, but that's just semantics. But essentially, what we're talking about is taking tasks and automating those tasks. And then the third category is really what I would say most of the hype around AI is about, which is really fancy mathematics. It's advanced data analytics, and so it's just the ability that we have with lots of data and very powerful computers and a bit of fancy maths to be able to spot patterns, to be able to do analytics. And in very, very narrow cases, machines are just simply better than humans at performing certain tasks, and that's pretty incredible. So those are the three things that AI is, and so certainly leadership in organisations can harness this in the decision making processes, in the planning processes, and looking for opportunities to make their businesses more successful. But I think the key thing is, and this is I think a kind of common mistake that organizations do make outside of the tech industry, is that they look at something like AI, they see all the hype, and they get a bunch of people, give them a bit of money, give them a bit of permission to go play with stuff, and kind of hope that they'll just kind of discover the magic. And it doesn't work that way. And I think what you've got to do instead is you've got to be really, first of all, clear about your strategy as an organization. What is it that you're trying to achieve? And then make sure that your AI capability that you're building is aligned to that strategy and helping you execute on that strategy. And so, if your business is focused on cost reduction, then you should make sure that the AI activities that you're building capability around are really focused on achieving that goal. And you should be looking at the various initiatives in the organization and deciding which of those might be candidates for AI, and if they're not, be brutal about it and find another solution. But you've got, I think, and I'm somebody who's definitely a technologist, somebody who loves tech, but you can't start with the tech. You've got to start with your strategy. You've got to start with your objectives, and then find the best solution for that problem in hand. So that would be my recommendation to leaders if they're dabbling with AI or haven't got started with AI to consider doing things in that way.
Thank you. I think that's interesting, but I'm just kind of wondering, how do you make it ethical? Because you hear these things like self-drive cars, and when they leave the AI to decide, who should be saved? Is it the driver or the pedestrian? The cars. Well, I don't know if it's a rumor or not, but people are saying or writing that the AI in the cars are choosing to hit non-white people or disabled people, or so like it's kind of, how do you how do you ensure the ethics are right so that you don't just get minority groups, whether that's through diversity or disability or whatever, gender, are made worse? How do we make sure it's fair and objective and doesn't pick up the biases that humans have?
Yeah. So I think what you're asking is the most important question of our day, because if we don't get this right, people won't trust in the technology. We will see a backlash, and it just simply won't be adopted. So it's a really good question. So I wrote a white paper on this, which got published, in January this year. A different lifetime.
It does feel like a long time ago, doesn't it?
It does. A lot's happened since then. So in this paper, we sort of outlined, what actually we think ethics is, and differentiating it against some other things. So I see the kind of governance that's necessary falling into three categories. Firstly, there's the adherence to regulation and also an organisation's involvement in public policy. So it's not just about following the law, not just about implementing GDPR, not just implementing the new AI regulations that we're going to see from the European Union in the next year or two. It's about to what extent is an organisation engaged in that regulatory conversation. So if you're Google or Facebook, you'd expect that organisation to be trying to make sure that there is regulation and a healthy regulatory landscape. And too often these organisations just simply lobby to try and stop regulation. So that's one area. Second area is what I would call risk and safety. And this is everything from making sure that systems are just well engineered so they don't break.
Yeah.
But it also means that other problems that can be solved through controls and best practice and a sort of engineering activities are followed. And within that, I would also include things like bias and discrimination, because the reason, all data unfortunately carries bias, because all data originates from humans, and we're flawed deeply, and we carry prejudice, and we are biased, and that's something which hopefully we fix and make better sooner than later. But the truth is, there's so many of us who carry prejudice, and so it's going to take realistically a lot of time. So the data that we have today, the data based on all the data that's being gathered, is biased. And I think we have to accept that reality and then work within that constraint. And so there's lots of techniques. There's a lot of research going into how do you debias data, how do you make sure that data is as much as possible, the human bias is sort of weeded out. So if you don't do that, the machine will simply amplify the existing bias. And another aspect of that is making sure that you've got a multidisciplinary team, also a diverse team, from backgrounds, from viewpoints, and from skills.
Yeah.
And so, this is a common failure. That you'll see, a group of people, and typically this is the story in some of the tech companies. It was a bunch of guys, this kind of bro culture, and they develop solutions that which have an impact on the whole of humanity. Like if you think about the like button on Facebook, one small change on that touches nearly 2 billion people in a very short order. And so if a small group of people who are quite similar make that change on behalf of the rest of humanity, it's just simply not representative of the rest of us. And so there's a lot that needs to be done around that diversity of the people in the design process. But I wouldn't call that ethics. Right. I would call that ethics something slightly different, which is really about the application of technology, which is making sure that we're using it for appropriate things and not crossing what I call the creepy line. And so, an example this year was a well-known British bank decided that it wanted to look at the productivity of its employees and start to gather data on how often they moved the mouse, how they were typing in the keyboard, whether there was any gaps in that, and sort of predicting how productive, how useful people were being. And that sort of surveillance of employees is something which, in that case, there was a backlash, and the organisation in question halted the project. But that's a really good example of technology being used to do something, and for whatever reason, the project team in charge of that just didn't see the problems. And the way you resolve those types of issues is having stakeholder management. You need to make sure that through your design process, and also after design, and also finally when you retire a product, when you decommission a product, you engage stakeholders, and stakeholders can be employees, stakeholders can be customers, stakeholders can also be wider society. And I think that's the imperative. So those are the three what I call domains of governance: ethics, safety, and regulatory compliance or public policy. So to come to your question, how do you make sure that self-driving cars don't do things which are breaking norms, and kind of crossing the creepy line? It's a really interesting problem, because it's one that touches all three of those domains. We're going to see regulation on self-driving cars in Europe, and by extension we'll see that affecting the UK, but also likely other countries as well. There's a good track record of tight regulation in Europe actually having a ripple effect around the world. So, despite Brexit, we're going to be impacted by what Europe does. And the European Commission is definitely thinking about autonomous vehicles and the question of who is liable if something goes wrong. So we're going to see that happen, which is good. And obviously there's a big responsibility on not just car makers, but also the companies that make the systems that get integrated into cars, to make sure that the products are well engineered, to a high standard, as you'd expect, and also, are doing things which are appropriate. But to come to your question about, self-driving cars making choices, and what happens in a kind of situation where something fails and who gets injured. There's been this debate has kind of been a sort of a thought experiment for 40, 50 years, and it was. I wish I could remember the name of the lady who came up with it, but it's called the Trolley Problem. It's something I read about in my white paper, but basically, the classic trolley problem is if you're standing on a bridge and you've got a lever in front of you, and the lever can divert the course of a train, and you see the train is hurtling down the tracks and is likely to hit someone, or is definitely going to hit someone. Do you pull that lever? And basically the question is, if you do nothing, are you responsible for the person's death? And so therefore, is there a moral imperative to act? And I think most people would say, I pull the lever. Of course I do. I try and save the person. But then a slight variation of that story is what happens is you see the train about to derail, and you've got to push someone off the bridge in order to avert a catastrophe. And I can't remember exactly the scenario, but the idea is if you push the guy off the bridge, the fat guy off the bridge, the guy will land on the tracks and the train will stop and it won't kill all the innocent children. Would you do that? And in a kind of cold light of day, looking at things, one death versus many deaths is preferable. But the idea of you having to actually, send someone to their definite fate is something which people really struggle with. And so we are torn about that. We're torn as to how to answer that. And, some of us will agonize over it and say, finally, this is the decision we'll take. And I don't think there is a right or wrong answer to this. I think this is a question of personal choice. But here's the big difference. As a thought experiment, as a philosophical exercise, it's just really interesting to see how people analyze these things. But the truth is, when we have car accidents as humans, that's not how we work. We don't kind of see the truck hurtling towards us and look at the left and look at the right and see the children on one hand and the elderly people on the other and decide which of the two groups we're going to swerve towards. We don't make that decision. We we react in the moment, and what happens after the accident is we sit down with a police officer, and the police officer says, what happened? And we post-rationalise, we tell a narrative back to the police officer based on how we've put back together the sequence of events. So when we speak to our insurance company and the insurance company says what happened, we post-rationalise, we tell them a narrative which makes sense to us. And hopefully the narrative that we tell the police and the insurance company is the truth. But maybe it's not. And actually, I think most of the evidence is that, the story that we tell is just a reconstruction and not actually the process of decision making that we have. And then what happens to kind of deal with this messiness, we have a long established court system. And the courts, the judge and the jury, they decide two things. First of all, the facts. What actually happened? What were the facts? Did you do this and then that and the other thing? That's the facts. And the jury decide the facts, and then the judge decides the law. And we've got hundreds of years of track record on this. But it's all based on this idea of post-rationalization, because there's no way to objectively say why you behaved the way that you behaved. It's all based on the narrative that you told, the evidence around. We have to kind of reconstruct the story. But machines are like the opposite. Machines are programmed. And so, we don't have this situation where you ask the self-driving car afterwards what it did, and it kind of comes up with a cock and bull story, and you have to kind of say, well, I'm not really sure that's the case. We know the answer. Because we know how the machines are designed, we know how the machines are programmed. And notwithstanding problems about explaining how AI systems work, we do have the control over which algorithms are used and what data is available. There's the answers are predetermined in that sense. With the same given the same data, given the same other variables, the answer will always be the same. And so it's actually it's a question that we have to engineer into our systems, and it's something which the sort of trolley problem thought experiment is just not it's not the same category of problem. And there's one last thing on this. The thing about accidents, and the thing about Elon Musk is somebody who talks a lot about how obviously he's got a vested interest. He's selling cars which have autonomous capability to an extent, not fully autonomous, but getting there. And Elon Musk says, look, self-driving cars are already safer than human drivers. Per kilometre, per mile driven, they just cause less accidents. And I think that the data is probably right on that. So if we're saying that self-driving cars are safer than humans, then there is an argument to say, well, wait, maybe we should start banning human drivers and just force everyone to use autonomous vehicles. But I think there's a problem with that logic. And the problem with that logic is when humans cause accidents, and I've been in a few myself, and I've been probably a few times myself. Humans tend to make human-like mistakes. So it's carelessness, it's recklessness, it's driving because you're tired, driving because you're changing the radio station, maybe driving because you're texting. These are things which we can start to go down the list of bad things that people do: driving when they're drunk, driving when they're on drugs, other sorts of forms of recklessness. But these are all sorts of human type mistakes. And while we might judge somebody for driving in a reckless way and causing an accident, while we might judge somebody, I think we can all relate to some of those things, and we can kind of understand those things. And we might judge, we might not forgive, but we can understand it. Machines don't make those types of mistakes. Machines make mistakes which are very unhuman. And an example of a very unhuman mistake would be the very sad story about how, in fact, a Tesla driver was killed a few years ago when a truck was pulling out in front of him, and the truck was painted grey. It was an overcast day. The car saw the side of the truck and basically decided it wasn't there, and so it accelerated straight towards it. And this idea of you being in the driver's seat of a car deciding to accelerate towards a stationary object is pretty horrific to imagine.
Yeah, I can't imagine what that poor guy must have felt like, because he couldn't stop the car.
Probably, thankfully, didn't realise until it was too late. But for the rest of us, it makes us kind of really feel queasy inside. And those are machine type problems. The machine. There was a woman in the States who was killed when she was walking a bicycle across the road, and the car didn't see it as a pedestrian walking a bicycle. It saw it as a bicycle moving, and predicted the bicycle moves between 10 miles an hour plus, and therefore thought the bicycle would be out of the way by the time the car crossed, and she was killed. And these are sort of machine type problems, machine type mistakes, but they're also psychopathic mistakes. And it's the same sort of mistake, it's the same sort of problem as when we see terrorists getting into a van and mowing down people walking on a pavement. Those, when we hear that story, when we see those images on the news, it makes us feel, those of us who are not psychopaths feel sickened by that. And that's the problem with machines. It doesn't matter that machines are just slightly safer than humans. The problem is that when machines do make mistakes, they make machine-like mistakes, and they are psychopathic mistakes, and they're things which we have a very strong reaction to. And so I think we're going to have to see self-driving cars be not just slightly better than humans, not just a lot better than humans, but an order of magnitude better than humans. There's, I think, 1.2 million people killed or seriously injured a year in car accidents. And if we saw that reduced by 100,000 people, that would be good. That would be fantastic. But if the resulting 1 million, 1.1 million serious injuries or deaths were psychopathic type problems caused by machines, I think we would all feel pretty sick. So I think we have to see that number, the quality of machines reduced to a fraction before we can tolerate it. And as for deciding between people of colour or people with disabilities, that's something which is can be resolved through much better controls around data and bias and multidisciplinary teams. There's no excuse for those sort of problems, and those things can definitely be engineered out.
Yeah, because because it's well known that facial recognition systems have such a low accuracy for people who are non-white males, but particularly people of colour. And I suppose that's a lot with the concern, isn't it? That dangerous mistakes can be made. I think I read somewhere that for the first time ever, I think it was in the States, police arrested the wrong guy based solely on AI information. So, a system, somebody had committed a crime, the system went through driving licenses, picked a black guy and said, this is the guy that done it. Yet if a human looked at it, it was clearly not the same guy. They looked nothing like each other. And the guy also wasn't even in the same area. He wasn't even anywhere. He was at work, but he still got arrested because the police refused to consider that the machine had made a mistake, even though if you looked at it, you could clearly see there was a mistake and there was no evidence he was there. And I think that's where people's concern was. And I remember also reading something that it's happened 2 or 3 times where Google or Facebook has put 2 AIs together to talk and do stuff, and then it didn't take too long before the AIs decided that English was taking too long for them to communicate and create their own language. And then you've got the engineers that have no idea what's happening. So the AI are appearing to make really good decisions, but they don't know what the decisions are based on. So if there is a wrong mistake, they can't unpick it. So do you continue using these 2 AIs chatting each other, not knowing what they're talking about, or not?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to the first point about making an arrest based on really faulty,
that is a human error too.
There's a big human error, and we're all familiar with the sketch of the computer says no from that TV show which I can't remember the name of now. So Friday morning, brain is mush. But computer says no when you're trying to book something or get access to something is frustrating. And I think we all remember situations where we've experienced the kind of computer says no, but that's not really a fault of the machine. That's a fault of just a really really poor process that's been implemented, where you're taking away the ability for humans to thrive and do the things that humans are good at. For me, one of the best examples of this, which we see every day, is in supermarkets. I used to work in a supermarket. I used to be a checkout person and used to scan people's shopping, and I used to love it because I used to talk to the customers, and some of them didn't want to talk to you, but most of them did, and it was just a very social activity. And obviously, the job of scanning the shopping was quite menial, but the other aspect of it, the bit that I could really thrive on, was the human interaction. And now we've replaced humans with there's automated checkout kiosks. There would be a great opportunity there for the human that's there to direct you to the one that's free and to resolve your problems, to be full of personality and to be really engaging and really warm and do all the wonderful things that humans are great at. But actually what the human does quite often, in my experience of going to supermarkets, is you get some grumpy person standing there going, number 2, number 4, come on, number 6 is available, come on, get on with it. And it's just a very negative experience.
Yeah.
And so I think we've got to make sure that the machines are doing what machines are good at, and humans are doing what humans are good at. And as machines increase in their capability, we also need to keep very much alive this, what I talk about in my TED Talk, human touch. We've got to decide what things machines should never do. And, for me, making a decision on who to arrest or making a decision on who to receive parole, those are questions, does it matter how accurate the machine is? Actually, is that something which it always needs to be a human making that decision? There was a story a few months ago about a machine telling a patient that they had a terminal illness or they only had hours to live, or it was in the States. And I just thought that was a very clear example of, the machine might be programmed to deliver that in the most perfect way possible. But, I personally think that should be something that we agree upon, that we never cross that line, and humans always have to do. But that's the debate. We've got to have a debate about these questions.
I suppose we're at the same stage, or a bit further on, when the people were debating test tubes, weren't they? Test tube babies all those years ago, and the ethics of, before we create babies in the tube, can we pick the eye colour, or what? What are the limits of that? And I suppose we're at the point now, because we are in danger, I suppose, if it's unregulated, that we could create Skynet. So from the old Terminator films in the 80s, be that where you just have decisions being made by a machine that you cannot question.
Well, I think we may have already created Skynet. We just never know about it. I mean, I think the point is that medical ethics.
Thanks for ruining my Friday morning, Charles.
I think it's quite true, and we just don't have. We've designed the internet plus machine learning. We've integrated AI into. I've got plug sockets that will switch on and switch off based on the temperature in the room or a sensor going off. We're starting to see AI in fridges and other domestic appliances. We've interconnected the world without thinking about it. And the question of ethics is being something which even now the tech industry is resisting. And that's why I've got my startup, because I'm trying to really force this question home. But with medical ethics, the good thing about medical ethics around cloning, around test tube babies, around all the sort of breakthroughs we've seen in terms of possibilities, there was a rigorous debate ahead of time, and we were able to make decisions based on GM. We didn't get into the place where there was already so much genetically modified crops in our agricultural system that it was too late to get rid of it. We made the decision as a society early on what those rules were, because the debate was there. And I think that's the thing. And I think if we all decide that we don't want AI, I think that's fine. We need to make that decision up front. But the tech industry, has such a huge amount of money and power, and those two things are very linked, and also political influence. That we're not seeing that debate fast enough, and we've really got to.
And I guess we're using AI to manipulate humans into making poor decisions anyway, because we can just look at a number of election processes over the recent years in a number of countries, which have demonstrated the ease of manipulating humans based on AI utilized data.
Yeah, but on both sides of that, I mean, I think Trump and Brexit get a lot of airtime because of the election interference using data analytics. But the thing that doesn't get talked about was that Barack Obama used the same techniques when he went for his re-election in the term before Trump got elected. And so that kind of gets airbrushed out because people have a political view and say, well, Trump is bad and Brexit is bad and Obama was good, and so I think we've got to be careful. Like, the AI system can be used from both sides.
Yes, it can.
For our winning group or our most hated group, it can be used from both sides. And I think the problem with Cambridge Analytica was it wasn't a breach of the law. It wasn't poor engineering. It wasn't bad quality stuff being done. It was sort of one side had bows and arrows and the other side had grenade launchers. And if you use technology effectively and you're better at it, guess what? You're going to have a better result. So
I think part of it though is that kind of, it makes me think, AI in the hands of a maverick. If you've got a socialized maverick who's working for the greater good, then you're more likely to get a better outcome than an extreme maverick who's only by themselves. And I think maybe that in itself is an issue with, I suppose, as I say, many countries are using AI right now to manipulate their populace. Some of them are using it for the greater good and some of them aren't. And I think that's where the ethics of AI is really important as well, as well as the intention of those that are using it. I think, if somebody said, I'm going to use AI to divide the world so that we all go, I don't know, we all nuke each other, you're going to go, well, that's probably not a great idea. But if someone said, I'm going to use AI as a way to ensure we manage the climate, then we might be going, well, that seems like a good idea. So it's like, do you have a madman holding the AI, or do you have a reasonable man holding the AI?
Well, I think the answer is neither, because who decides who's mad and who decides who's good. Exactly. And right now in the West, there's a lot of we've got a lot of geopolitical tension towards China, and we very much see things are happening in China, but we see them through Western eyes. What we forget is that in China, there's an equally robust debate towards us in the West and looking at how we live. I remember a conversation that I had once when I was traveling in China, and I was just curious as to how people saw us in the West, and also I was curious about their view on democracy, because obviously it's the one thing that we have and we're quite proud of, and they don't have, and surely they must be craving it. And the thing that was said, and this will always stick with me, was yes, you've got democracy, but when I look at the news, I see cars in Paris that are burning because people are protesting in the street, and I see riots and protests all across Europe, and you've got Brexit, which makes no sense, you've got Trump, which makes no sense. So it is democracy such a good thing after all. Look what we've achieved. We've risen out of poverty. We've built these beautiful cities, and we're actually on a path to becoming a much greener society as well. And we're able to do those things because we don't have democracy. And it really struck me that actually, there are always two sides to every story. Yeah. So I think the answer to this is, you have to have rigorous debate, and you also have to have rigorous stakeholder engagement. And I think this is the problem with, there's a lady called Adiola Enig Boken. She's based in the University of Amsterdam or Maastricht or Rotterdam. She's somewhere in the Netherlands, and she's from Brooklyn originally. And she said to me, the way that her expertise is really thinking about sort of town planning and the urban environment and architecture. And she said to me that, if you were designing a new public space in Brooklyn, you would have to engage with the landowners, the local businesses. You'd have to engage with the local community, the residents, people who travel to come to work in that area. You'd have to engage with homeless people. You have to engage with all of these different stakeholders to make sure that the space was designed reflecting, all of those people's interests. And a successful urban project would be one where all stakeholders walk away at the end of that process feeling that they've got, something that works for them. It's all about stakeholder engagement. It's all about compromise. And she says that that's something which we've developed the best practice for that over the last 100 years or so, and they're now, it's really clear what best practice looks like. But with the tech industry, the challenge is that if you're Facebook, you've got 2 billion users, 2 billion people that you're affecting. And basically what the tech industry is saying is that's just too many people. That's just too many stakeholders. That's just too many points of view. So we're not going to engage 2 billion people. That would just be silly. What we're going to do is just, tell you what good looks like, or hire some experts and get them to tell us what good looks like. And the point is that's why we get a backlash towards this stuff. If you have been so successful, if you're, Mr. Bezos, you're the richest man in the world. You've nearly doubled your wealth in the pandemic. If you're a company like Amazon, with such success and such reach, it's not an excuse to say, well, we've just got too many customers, we've got too many stakeholders, we can't engage them all. It is still your imperative to do so. And I think, that's the thing that we've got to start holding organizations to account on.
Fantastic. I think that's so true. And I think it's probably a good place to end, unless there's something that you're dying to tell me and I didn't give you the opportunity.
I could talk all day on this subject. Where would I
Well, you'll have to come back. You'll definitely have to come back, and we'll have another conversation in a month or so, a couple of months.
Yeah, no, I would love to. The thing I would just like to say would be, people who listen to this find this interesting, find this provocative, that's super. If you don't agree with the things I've said, that's also super, because I think it's so important that we foster debate and we have conversations about this. And we live in this world where so many of us are addicted to our phones and our devices and to the news channels that we see, and actually, in many respects, we've lost the art of having these conversations over the dinner table, over the telephone, and really engaging with people who have different perspectives to us. So I really hope that some of the things I've said have struck a chord, and people will go back to their friends and their families and maybe open up some debates about some of these questions. And with that in mind, I would maybe just ask if you haven't seen my TED talk, then to look me up. It's called 3 Steps to Surviving the Robot Revolution, and it's really hopefully a talk about optimism when it comes to robots and unemployment, which will inevitably be caused by machines. But otherwise, stay safe and look at technology with a critical eye would be my parting words.
Thank you. I agree. That's fantastic. And I'll put this will also go on the Maverick Paradox magazine, and I'll put a link to the TED talk on it there.
That's super. Thank you. Oh, and Jude, one last thing. I forgot to say, I'm actually launching my own TED talk. I'm launching my own podcast, which is going to come out on the 2nd of November. So just as we speak now, just a few weeks away. And it's going to be called, Are You a Robot? And it's a TED talk devoted to asking these questions about AI and ethics. And we've got some really amazing speakers. I'm not one of them. Everyone we've got is just so wonderful, so rich. And I'll give you a flavour. We've got this guy called Jason Edward Lewis, who runs a group called Indigenous Ai. And the group is looking at how do we make AI work for Indigenous peoples across the world. So people like the Native American population, or Maori, or Aboriginal people. And it's so rich and so fascinating. Asking that question, and he's got some great views, and so that's one of the episodes I'm most looking forward to. But we've also got a group called Fawkes, as in Guy Fawkes, and this is set up by a team in Chicago. And we talked about facial recognition earlier. What they've actually done is develop an AI system that can basically mess with pictures in such a way as to make it impossible for facial recognition to work. But what's really clever about it is that if you look at, say, a picture of you and a picture of you once Fawkes has done its magic, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. It's messed with the picture in such a way that human eye can't distinguish between the two. But it does make it impossible for a machine to be able to recognize you. And that's something which is really cool, using AI to mess with AI. So we're hopefully that episode will be coming out on the 5th of November in time for Guy Fawkes night. So
brilliant. Well, definitely that's one to look out for. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Charles as much as I enjoyed having it.
If you are pathologically curious and would love to find out more about the Maverick Paradox, then please subscribe to this podcast on one of the popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, you could explore our resources on Mavericks at maverickparadox.com or read the Maverick Paradox magazine. We publish frequently each week. If you subscribe, you will get our monthly newsletter. And let's not forget my book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders. For those that love a good discussion, you could apply to join our exclusive Facebook group. And finally, if you would like to work with us or just interested in finding out more about the Maverick at work, check out our website maverickparadox.co.uk.